What's up, everybody? This is Mike from the Fantasy Footballers. Wanted to stop in and say thank you for checking out the DFS podcast. We are very, very excited for these new hosts that you are about to hear. You already know their names. Maybe you heard them in passing, but I wanted to come in here and let you know these guys know their stuff. We have our editor-in-chief, Kyle Borgononi, K-Borg, the Borgogan, whatever you want to call him. Kyle is always helping us out with our show docs, getting everything ready over on the Fantasy Footballers podcast. This dude is very knowledgeable. He knows what he is talking about. And we have Matthew Betts, a licensed physical therapist, our injury expert. If you have the Ultimate Draft Kit, you have read his words. He's always given us great stuff on injuries, and he knows his stuff as well. Very excited to present the new and improved Fantasy Footballers DFS podcast. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borgononi and Matthew Betts.
Welcome in, everyone, to a new dynamic duo on our DFS podcast. We got Borg and Betts, which sounds like we're opening up a law firm or something. but yeah, welcome to DFS for the rest of us. This is the Fantasy Footballers DFS show. If you tune in each week to the main Footballers show, this is a chance for some of us degenerates to talk about DFS, something that we're super passionate about. And I'm joined by Matthew Betts. Matt, how you doing, dude?
Dude, I'm doing fantastic. It is so good to be on the mic with you for our first ever show. The listeners unfortunately didn't see me, but I was like kind of fist pumping during the intro. I'm so excited. I could not be happier to be doing this show with you. And, you know, the term degenerates, people get upset about it. Listen, embrace it. We're all here together, and we're here to help DFS be easier, DFS for the rest of us. So I'm super excited, Kyle.
Yeah, and it's not like you have anything going on this week, Matt. I know, like, you know, we're recording a podcast tonight, but you don't have anything coming up this weekend, do you?
No, sir. This weekend is just another casual, no plans. Maybe do a little housework, maybe a little yard work. No, I'm actually getting married this coming weekend, which is super exciting. I am thrilled and cannot wait. So, yes, very exciting news for me.
Pretty great for a first podcast we get to do together on the show. And, you know, you're leading into the biggest weekend of your entire life. But I know for us in this show, we've been a part of the Fantasy Footballers family for a while. We got to write. I'm the editor. You're the injury expert. And so we kind of get to bring different levels of expertise. But for a lot of you guys out there, DFS might be new to you. Maybe you listen to the main show and you kind of want to dip your toes in. So we really want to be able to sit down with you and explain what DFS is, how to attack it, what it means to be a smart player, to not be someone who just lights their money on fire on different websites. And so we've got some really great shows for you. We're going to do a best ball strategy show today. And then in August, we're going to talk a little bit more about best ball values and some DFS 101 to kind of give you some tools to work with so that as the season rolls into September, which there is going to be a season, there is going to be an NFL season.
Let's go.
We can pump our fists for that's 2 fist pumps for you already. So I'm gonna start the counter.
I'm just so excited.
As we roll into September and we get into week 1, we can have some clear ideas of how to approach this, how to construct a roster, how to allocate your money, which contest to get into. So we got a lot of great content, but I want to go through a quick question really at the beginning of this. How did you get connected to the Fantasy Footballers? And more importantly, how did you get connected to writing in this community?
Yeah, for sure. So you kind of mentioned at the top being the injury expert here on staff for the Ballers. And, you know, I'm a board certified orthopedic physical therapist, so I'm working full-time in the clinic, seeing all these injuries that we see in the NFL, ACL injuries, rotator cuff injuries, ankle sprains, etc. I see that firsthand. And at the time, a couple years ago, I was, consuming fantasy football content and playing a ton myself. And I realized, I was like, man, there's not a lot of other people, not named Stephania Bell, doing this. Like, there needs to be more PTs in this space. So I was fortunate enough to get started with a couple of smaller sites and shows, and then got connected with my good friend, also writer on staff, Ben Cummins, who you might remember from the show a couple years ago. And he said, hey man, I think you'd be perfect for the Ballers. Let me connect you to them. And I'm so thankful that he did that. Ben, you're the man. Fortunately, found you guys, and it's been fantastic ever since.
No, that's awesome. No, I came across your application a couple of years ago. As an editor, I kind of get to sift through. We're actually in the middle of hiring some writers right now. And for me, I had been connected. I'd done fantasy football writing on the side a little bit. And then when they put out the call for the first kind of OG crew that started writing for the Footballers, I think it was back in 2016, I was fortunate enough to be a part of that group, and then kind of slowly worked my way, took some of Brooks' responsibilities as he was doing more in studio to edit, to have our team together, to help the guys with the show docs. So a lot of the stats we get to do on the show, I get to fill in. But in terms of DFS, this has kind of been a slow burn. It's been something that I dip my toes in, and now I'm in a place where I get to think through every single matchup, not just from how does this help me win my home league, but how can I optimize a roster with some constraints, because you can't have everybody in a DFS lineup, and try to outpace everyone else. So it's like a different level of thinking. It's a different kind of puzzle and narrative you're piecing together. And I think that's why it's so attractive to me. What about for you? Why are you into DFS?
Yeah, for me, I love the competition amongst other players in fantasy. And I feel like depending on the level of player that you are, it's relatively easy to compete in a home league. As long as you're smart, you check the waiver wire, you listen to a show or read some articles, like you'll be all right and you'll do fine. In DFS, it's much more difficult to get a leg up on the competition. And with places like DraftKings and FanDuel, et cetera, those kind of places just booming in recent years, more people are playing, so the competition is going up. And I love that strategy piece of it. That's not just, okay, who's going to score the most points this week? He's in my lineup, especially if you're playing in like a bigger tournament. And we'll talk about different, types of contests to play in. But if you're in a tournament trying to differentiate yourself from the field, there's just so much more strategy. And like you said, you just have to think at a different level. And that to me is super exciting.
For sure. And we've got you covered here at the Fantasy Footballers. We have our DFS pass. We have a special for those that get to listen to this podcast. If you use the promo code DFS pod, not only do you get the DFS pass with a little discount, it's $59.99 with a little discount, you also get the Ultimate Draft Kit for free. And that's a nuts deal, because the Ultimate Draft Kit is something that the guys pour their heart and souls into. It's updated every single day. So when we found out that Damian Williams opted out for this year, that was updated immediately. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, his video profile was immediately updated. And so that is an awesome tool. That's an award-winning tool. But then you also get this content that we add every single week. There's articles, there's proprietary things that only is found in that DFS pass, and you get to write a couple of those articles too, Betts.
Yeah, definitely. I write up the injury report section of the Ultimate Draft Kit, and obviously we're recording this show in late July when the calendar turns to August, man. Like for me, it's nuts with all the training camp injuries. And like you said, those are updated the day of the injury along with the statistical projections from the guys. And, it's honestly a fantastic resource. And I feel like I'm saying that with a little bit of bias, but honestly, I was buying it before I was even a writer here, and it's just game changing. So yeah, check it out. And with this deal, it's unbelievable. I mean, are these guys trying to make any money, or what? Are they just giving this thing away? This deal is fantastic. So go check it out, guys.
Yeah, in season, the DFS pass is $60. And so you get the DFS pass and the UDK right now if you go online, fantasyfootballers.com. But for our main segment today, we're going to be talking about best ball strategies and pivots. So let's get into it.
Best Ball Bonanza.
For some people out there, best ball might be a new term. We put out this question on Twitter from our main account, Footballers, and a lot of people are asking, what is best ball? And so we have some great articles on the website about some best ball tips and strategies for beginners. But just to explain, just real simply, we'll kind of go back and forth a little bit. But with best ball, you actually do win your league at the draft. So in best ball, you are drafting with roughly 12 other people, depending on your 11 other people, depending on your size, and you're setting your lineup and it's done. the system or the website that you use will actually find the optimal scoring for you each week. So you never have to look at your roster again. You get to draft, and you can draft as much as you want. That's part of the best thing. The reason why people are doing best ball drafts right now is because it actually gives you a better picture of what ADP is, because people have money on it. People are real serious about it, but you kind of get to figure out where people are landing. And you get to set these kind of rosters and figure out, how do I construct my team in order for them to outpace the rest of the opponents. So in best ball, getting in third place or fourth place isn't actually that great. You're going for first. You're trying to outpace the rest of your opponents. And so you're looking for a team that is just going to be a juggernaut when it comes to especially the end of the year.
Yeah, in the words of the great Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last. And that is very true in best ball. I think you hit the nail on the head in kind of describing what it is, right? It's best ball typically is a format where you are shooting for upside. And we're going to talk a lot about that and trying to kind of differentiate yourself from your opponents and try to think about, okay, how can my lineup and my draft be more optimal down the stretch in the season? You know, like you said, you can't really manage this team. So your draft is the only chance to really set yourself apart from your league mates. And I like it a lot because, like you said, it just gives you a sense of kind of, you know, not a mock draft where people are kind of maybe logging in for like 3 to 5 picks and then they're like, okay, that's what my draft's going to look like in the first 5 rounds. I'm good. Let me log out. No, in best ball, people have usually a few bucks in the draft, and they care a lot more. So they're going to stick around for all, 18 or 20 rounds, depending on what format you're using. But yes, best ball to me is the new mock draft, I think, in today's fantasy football world.
No, that's a great point. And there's been one site that I've been using recently. I know you've been using this a lot, and it's Underdog Fantasy. And here at Fantasy Footballers DFS, we're going to get to partner with them this year. But yeah, Underdog's a great format, and I'm actually on the clock right now. And so I didn't tell you this, but I'll tell you right now, later on in the show, I actually want to talk through one of your points, and you're going to help me with the draft. I'm in the, I think, 12th round right now.
No
and
pressure.
So we're yeah, not at all. We're shooting for upside, but yeah, I've loved Underdog drafts. Really simple, really clear. What about you so far?
Yeah, honestly, I can't say enough good things about it. The platform is awesome. And man, these guys, like, people have been wanting best ball for so long this summer when draft unfortunately had to close last year. And if you're not familiar with draft, essentially a lot of the features that you're going to find on Underdog for obvious reasons in terms of the product there are basically similar to what draft was. So if you loved playing on draft last year, go check out Underdog Fantasy. I think it's even better. Really, really do like it quite a bit. And I've already done a few drafts myself.
Yeah, it's been awesome so far. Especially you can set your timer. If you got time right now, you can do 30 seconds per pick and you can get through a draft really fast. Or if you're like me, you want to enter a draft and take your time, you can have 8 hours on the clock. And so there's lots of awesome formats. But on our show today, we wanted to talk specifically about strategies and pivots. And the reason I chose that word pivot is because everybody and their mama has had to pivot for 2020. There's been so much uncertainty. And so when it comes to fantasy football, there's kind of been this back and forth, like, I don't really know if we're really going to make this happen. And so how does that affect best ball? How does that affect how you construct a team? How does that change? And so we're going to go through 5 different strategies. And the first one I have is say goodbye to bye weeks. And usually the footballers talk about this, but in redraft leagues, you kind of downplay the importance of bye weeks when you're drafting a team because you get to trade in season, you get to work the waiver wire. And so the team that you draft is honestly very different than the team you end up with. But as we said earlier in best ball, there is no trading. There's no changing to your rosters. There's no maintenance. So you have to get your bye weeks correct. But in this season of COVID, and the uncertainty for a team, positive tests for COVID, someone can be on the IR, for any length of time. Someone could be there for a week, and then someone could be there for 3 weeks. And so there's kind of a sense where you need to understand, especially when you have your team, that teammates, that's actually where the virus is going to spread most. So it's not going to be, you have one guy on Dallas, you have another guy in Washington. It's going to be if you have 3 players on the Cowboys, and if 1 or 2 players gets it, that's really going to shift things. And so I would tell people that you should limit your team to no more than 3, because if you take 3 zeros in just any given week, that's going to kill your team, especially if you're coupling that on top with bye weeks. So yeah, you just have to approach your draft a little differently this year and not try to load up. I've seen people with 4 Chiefs on their team, and that's incredible if you start that way. But you're putting all your eggs in that basket.
Yeah, and I think those types of situations, and we'll talk a lot more in detail, probably in future shows about like different types of best ball. So there's like your normal 12-man league or 10-man league, but on Underdog, they're doing this like crazy huge tournament where, only the best actually make it into getting a little bit of money back. And when I say a lot of money back, so go check it out. But really, you have to differentiate yourself so much. And I think that's why, like you're saying, people are taking 4 Chiefs and just hoping that the offense is incredible like it was last year and is projected to do so. But there is some risk with it. So if you're in that type of format, I guess I'm okay with like risking it a little bit more to try to be different. But if you're just playing with, 11 of your buddies and you really just want to be the one on top at the end of the year in that 12-team format, then this tip is crucial, I think, to understand.
Yeah, especially in that Best Ball Mania tournament, you're trying to be the top 0.001% of the field. But yeah, you walk home with $200,000 and, and so you're trying to hit the nuts essentially. But yeah, I just think we need to think that this isn't just going to go away because we're going to start football. We're seeing it right now in MLB that whole teams get shut down. It's not just, a couple players on the Marlins, the entire team had to shut things down. So why don't you go into the next point?
Yeah, for me, it's all about running backs in best ball, and I'm targeting them early and often. Like you kind of talked about, the waiver wire does not exist in best ball formats. So a typical strategy in redraft leagues, one common thing that you'll see is 0 running back strategy, which basically means that you're passing on running backs most often in the early rounds and trying to hit on those stud wide receivers like Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, etc., and then trying to hit on some running backs later in your draft or picking up running backs off of waiver wire after injury. In best ball, you can't do that. And so we really don't want to be targeting those running backs in round 8, 9, 10, 11, or gosh, even later. You definitely don't want to be doing that because it's just so difficult to see a scenario where those players come out and produce for you. You want those stud running backs. And so I found myself oftentimes actually taking 2 or 3 and sometimes even 4 running backs to start my draft and loading up on those stud running backs early. And actually, when you look back at kind of the hit rates historically of teams that succeed in best ball and teams that don't in terms of winning some cash, the teams that target running backs early typically do better, and the teams that target them late typically do not actually bring home any money. That's obviously what we care about, right? So for me, it's all about the running backs early and often.
Yeah, especially when you look at teams that you're facing, you're trying to outpace them, and the place that we see that in fantasy is that high-end running backs just destroy. I mean, they're almost 2 players in one. When you've seen Christian McCaffrey the last 2 years, you're not just getting, the RB1, you're essentially getting like a wide receiver, a top 15 wide receiver alongside. And so you're just thinking, how can I take my team? And everybody wants Christian McCaffrey on the team, obviously. But when you pair that with 2 or 3 others that just have high workloads, you could just bank on that every single week when other people are trying to piece together their running backs, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But, people are trying to piece together the running backs on these flyers. And it is a sexy topic to be able to say, I hit on a running back in the 9th round. That happens once a year, that not everybody's going to be doing that. And so, yeah, those running backs are essential. And then they allow you to kind of shoot for upside later on in draft. So for my next point, I want to talk about that word upside. And I'm calling this shoot for Mars, but if you get to the moon, that will do. You see, the word upside, it's not a secret word anymore in fantasy circles. Everyone's trying to swing for the fences, especially in best ball. You're looking for guys that no one else is looking at that can kind of finish maybe as a top 15 in their position. I'll give you an example. Last year, one of the keys to best ball was a player named DJ Chark that people were not drafting. When people were looking at the Jaguars wide receivers, they were mostly thinking it's D.D. Westbrook, and I was one of those people. I didn't have DJ Chark anywhere.
Me too.
And so nobody was looking at DJ Chark. And so for a big tournament, he was an ultimate play because he was so low owned, and yet he ended up being a monster, especially the first half of the year. And so everyone's swinging for the fences. But I also need to say this. Almost everybody whiffed on DJ Chark last year. Like, nobody was drafting him in redraft. Realize that most of us whiff, and although we're all shooting for top 12 finishers, only 12 people finish in the top 12. It's really hard to crack that. And so while you're shooting for upside, while you're shooting for Mars, realize this, that sometimes just getting to the moon with mixing in floor plays is super helpful. And I'll give you an example. James White is just not a name that people get excited about right now when it comes to their fantasy rosters. You know, he's going about the RB, 26 or a little bit later in some drafts. He kind of gets to that point in drafts where you've gotten past all the stud running backs. And then you get to the kind of guys like Chris Carson, David Johnson. You're like, I think they could be something. But once you get past that group, there's a group of people that you're just kind of like, I mean, I guess I could draft them, but I can't see the ceiling. But the problem is you need those types of guys because they will actually get you to the finish line. James White is consistent. You know he's going to be on the field. You know that in terms of him getting the passing down work, it's there. And I honestly think that Patriots defense is going to be a little bit worse this year. They're going to be in more passing situations. So you mix in guys like that, Jameson Crowder, a guy I know you like, Hunter Renfrow. Those are the guys that can actually piece together a team so that if your guys aren't hitting, you have floor plays that can get you there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that call with those, it just kind of seems to be, I guess it's like a stigma of like, slot wide receivers or these just like, pigeonholed pass catching backs. Well, oftentimes these formats are either half PPR or full PPR, some of them. And so you want to be able to target pass catching backs for that reason. And to have that floor is huge. You can't have players in your lineup going off for 25 points every week. It just won't happen. And you need those like 10 to 15 point performances to give you that floor come end of the season. So yes, that is going to help you get to the finish line. And then like you're saying, shooting for upside later in the draft will help kind of push you over the edge. So I think a combination of the two, probably skewing a little bit more towards upside with a little bit of floor mixed in is my preferred format. But if you just go straight upside, I mean, you could be bottom three. I mean, you won't get there. It just won't happen based off the statistical hit rates of kind of how these players perform.
Yeah, and I like Hunter Renfrow as that example. He was my last pick in a dynasty draft 2 years ago. But last year, when he was on the field, he was utilized by Derek Carr. He doesn't really, like when I see his name on the app, I'm not really thrilled because the dude looks more like, I don't know, an accountant or a financial. He doesn't look like a football player, obviously. And so I really want to pass on him. But towards the end of my draft, if he's my 7th wide receiver, I mean, he could easily get me there.
Yeah, and you just kind of talk about that offense in general. I mean, he could lead the team in targets. There is a possibility. I'm not saying we project that. Obviously, I think we are looking at Darren Waller to be that, but he could certainly be that easy number 2 target for Derek Carr. We know that depth of target is not very high for him, and that plays very well into Hunter Renfrow's role. So I'm with you on that for sure, man.
Yeah, and I love this stat about Derek Carr that he was actually the best quarterback on third down in the NFL last year. He had more third down touchdowns, a higher third down completion than anybody in the league. And I checked, he actually was pretty middle of the road when it came to attempts. He was just super efficient on third down. And so if he can continue to convert with Waller and Renfrow, and they have obviously some rookies that they've added in, it could be an interesting team in best ball to stack. Because I mean, I'm assuming most people don't want to stack any Raiders, but if you want to get Carr super late, maybe you got Josh Jacobs early and you want to mix in one of those pass catchers, hey, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Nope, certainly not. Number 2 for me in the show doc here today is, what do we do about quarterbacks and tight ends, right? Because I feel like in most redraft leagues, you're either taking 2 or just 1, especially if you get like a stud quarterback or a stud tight end. If you got Travis Kelce or like George Kittle, you're done and you don't even think about it in redraft. In best ball, of course, it's important to have multiple of those. If you have 1 tight end or just 1 quarterback, I mean, you have a virtual 0 chance of winning your league. And honestly, it's because of the tight end position and the quarterback position are just so fluid with who performs, right? We talk about it all the time in redraft leagues. Like the tight end 6 to like the tight end 15 is essentially the same player, right? So you want to have that weekly variance of like, okay, this week the tight end 10 smash and he actually finishes the tight end 2. Whereas you could have, someone that's a stud in your lineup and just for whatever reason, he puts up a dud week, but you have that backup tight end to kind of elevate you there. And the same is true for quarterback. But the question is, do you take 2 or do you take 3? And, for me, and I think for our listeners, the important thing to take away from this conversation is just when did you take the first quarterback or the first tight end? Looking at my strategy and kind of what I usually do is like, okay, if I have a Mahomes, a Lamar Jackson, a Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, for example, I know that the vast majority of the time that player is going to outproduce some backup that I get late in the draft, like, I don't know, Phillip Rivers or Derek Carr or something like that. So I'm fine to just take 2. But if you miss on an early quarterback or early tight end, the same example can be true for a guy like Travis Kelce. I want multiple. I want 3 of those kind of middle round, middle tier type of players, late round dart throws with upside. And so for me, understanding the difference there in terms of when I took those position players is crucial in terms of how many you should take. And what that does is just lets you have way more of a chance to hit on those late wide receivers that have this term we like to use, that upside. So for me, it's all about 2 or 3 for those positions. And you got to kind of know which you should be doing in your draft based off what you did early on.
All right, so let's put that to the test. I mentioned earlier, but I'm actually on the clock. Says I've been waiting for an hour and a half, which is way over time for me. I'm usually like, I'm queued up, I'm ready to go, but I'm on my underdog fantasy app. Sorry. Underdog. I'm in the underground. I'm on my underdog app, and let me just tell you my team right now, because I'm actually questioning quarterbacks and tight ends right now. I've got, so far my quarterback's Deshaun Watson, and then for my tight ends, I've kind of waited, and I've got Mike Gesicki and Blake Jarwin. I feel fine piecing together something, but based on that roster right now, would you say you need to take 2 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends, or should I mix it up something different?
Yeah, I think I'm fine with Watson being that kind of stud locked in QB1 for you the vast majority of the time. And so I would pair him with someone else late in the draft and kind of just go 2. I think based off the tight ends, you said it was Gesicki and who else?
And Blake Jarwin. For me, those 2 just aren't like secure enough in their role of what we know they are going to be in fantasy. The upside is certainly there. I like both those players, but I would be targeting 3 tight ends, 2 quarterbacks in that scenario. Yeah, I'm kind of at the point now where I'm picking which quarterback I want to wait for. So on the board is Joe Burrow, Jimmy Garoppolo, Teddy Bridgewater, which I'll talk about in a second, Kirk Cousins, Gardner Minshew. I'm pretty fine with any of those guys. Then it gets a little bit further into Drew Lock and Sam Darnold. But I feel fine with any of those 5 quarterbacks. And then at tight end, you've got Eric Ebron, Ian Thomas, Jack Doyle, Chris Herndon. I feel like I could piece together my tight ends through any of those guys. But there is one running back that's still on there that I didn't mention that's been talked about a lot on the Fantasy Football Show, and that's Antonio Gibson. He has the type of upside that's hard for me to pass up. I'm gonna hope that Teddy Bridgewater makes it back to me. But,
all right, there you go. Why are you so in on Teddy? Give the people a little peek behind the curtain here. What's intriguing about Teddy Bridgewater in best ball? Because no one thinks this guy has upside. So why would you ever take him in best ball?
Yeah, one thing is I checked the other day. His MVP odds are 10,000 to 1, and I'm a staunch supporter of The Office. I love The Office, and Kevin Malone on The Office says if you ever get 10,000 to 1 odds, you take that odds, and that if John Cougar Mellencamp ever wins an Oscar, he's going to be a very rich man. That's the quote. So that's part of it. But also, I just want to say this about Teddy Bridgewater. We usually think he's a conservative passer, hasn't done much in the league. Last year, he was 5-0 with the Saints. He's familiar with Joe Brady, who's coming in as the offensive coordinator. And the pace is going to be up-tempo. But realize this, I checked out this today. The Panthers were actually top 5 in pace last year in terms in terms of seconds per play. So they were already in up tempo because they were bad. They were behind. And I think they're going to be bad again. Their defense has been completely decimated. And the type of offense that they're going to run is going to be 3 wide. It's going to be DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, and Robbie Anderson out in the field. You're going to see Ian Thomas, and then you're going to see Christian McCaffrey. And so I see them, just the amount of plays, the volume of plays, and the short passing game as an opportunity for Teddy to kind of way outperform his ADP. I mean, right now in a lot of drafts, you can get him as the quarterback 22, 23. I think that he can easily hit top 12. And in best ball, I'm banking on him doing that. If you take Christian McCaffrey early, if you have the 101, then come back later and get Teddy Bridgewater. It's one of my favorite ways to stack. What about you? You about those Panthers?
I'm all in. I'm definitely in on the Panthers, especially in the best ball format, because I know that there's going to be production on this team, certainly obviously with McCaffrey, but then I know that one of these receivers is going to pop, and I know that obviously Teddy Bridgewater is going to be throwing them the ball. So I have been kind of mixing in some stacks where it's Teddy and DJ Moore. I have also been mixing in some Curtis Samuel here and there, as well as some Ian Thomas in a few of my different leagues and drafts that I'm doing, because you talked about the defense, man. Listen to the names they lost, okay? They lost James Bradbury. They lost Luke Kuechly. They lost Mario Addison. They lost Bruce Irvin. Eric Reed was the leading tackler. He's now gone. They used all 7 draft picks on defensive players. It is going to be bad. It is going to be up-tempo, and I want volume, and I want more shots at volume. This offense is going to provide that. So, yeah, I like all these players in terms of a stack with Teddy. And I think, for me, I've been skewing towards that 2 quarterback format where I'm going after one of these guys and trying to aggressively go after someone I want. And then I know, without a doubt, Teddy Bridgewater is going to be available to me late in my draft. So I found myself with quite a bit of him on my roster so far, especially on Underdog.
Yeah, let's kind of explain the benefits of stacking. I think a lot of players are familiar with this. When you think about 2 players or 3 players or even more that correlate. So if your wide receiver goes off, it's probably because your quarterback did well. A lot of times in redraft, we kind of stay away from that. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket if you have a bad game. But in best ball, you're not having to set your lineup. And so you're just thinking by the end of the season, how is my team doing in terms of overall production? And when it comes to stacking, whether that's stacking a wide receiver or tight end or, stacking running backs and quarterbacks is incredible correlation plays as well. You want stacks that fit your budget. I mentioned earlier, it'd be really great if all of us could have Patrick Mahomes, who's now the owner of the KC Royals, which is awesome. I think that is incredible.
That was very cool.
If you want Mahomes, Tyreek, Kelsey, but you're going to have to pay up. And so you want stacks, especially if you're waiting on quarterback. If you're one of those drafters that says, I'm going to wait on quarterback, then you're waiting and seeing how the draft kind of unfolds and how it falls to you. But let's say you did get DJ Moore in the 3rd or 4th round. Then you can ask yourself, I can get Teddy Bridgewater late. And if DJ Moore goes off, it's probably because Teddy Bridgewater is having a good week as well. There's a correlation there. But my favorite with those Panthers is Curtis Samuel. He's the wide receiver 60 in best ball, which is just a travesty. And we talked, off air about this. We've talked about it on Twitter, but I'm pretty sure that Curtis Samuel is going to be my guy this year. I'm pretty sure that he is the person in this offense that's going to be running out of the slot. DJ Moore is going to probably be outside. Robbie Anderson's going to do his 9-route thing. But I think Curtis Samuel is going to play in the slot. He's going to get a lot of those short targets. And I think that's where Teddy Bridgewater excels. So that's a really cheap stack that if I can get somebody at wide receiver 60 and quarterback 23, then that's affordable. I can actually have all my early studs. I can get my running backs, and then I have some upside built in. So do you have any stacks that you really like?
Yeah, for sure. I really like a Jimmy G and a George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk type of stack in my leagues where I go after the 49ers. And really this comes down to a couple of things. One is that I don't think a lot of people are going to be targeting that specific stack. Everyone's going to have George Kittle, obviously. He's the top 2 tight end in fantasy. But there's a stigma, kind of like Teddy, Jimmy G is kind of known as like a game manager, and they run the ball a ton, and the defense is amazing, so he won't throw the ball that much. Well, I'm going to try to take advantage of that narrative because last year, what this defense did is probably not that sustainable. We see this year to year, especially in fantasy, where defenses tend to kind of bounce up and down. They're kind of like the stock market, sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes in the middle. And for me, I look at this defense and we say, okay, they just lost after trading DeForest Buckner. They also lost a couple pieces in the secondary. I think there's regression coming for the defense is really the point. But then with that, you have to factor in, okay, it's probably likely that Jimmy G throws the ball way more than he did last year. And he put up pretty decent numbers in his limited attempts. We're looking at like 7th in the NFL in touchdown rate at 5.7, number 8 in passer rating, number 3 in yards per attempt. So when he gets chances to succeed, he does. And if he gets more chances, I think stacking him with a guy like George Kittle, especially with Debo coming off of the broken foot and Brandon Ayuk, who's going extremely late in best ball drafts, is really affordable. And I think it's a good way in these massive tournaments, especially like Underdog Fantasy is offering, to really differentiate yourself because everyone wants the Pat Mahomes stack, like you said. No one wants the Jimmy G stack except for me.
Yeah, no, those Niners, their pass defense was the lowest passing yards per game allowed since the Jets in 2009 when Darrelle Revis was like doing his thing. So they had a massive like outlier season in terms of just what they allowed through their opponent's passing game. And so you got to figure that Jimmy G is going to throw a little bit more. The yards per attempt is there. He just needs more attempts. So yeah, that's a stack that's totally doable. And I cannot stress this enough. Do not go into your draft saying, I have to stack this way. You kind of have to let the draft unfold. So one of the worst feelings in best ball is when you set your queue or you're ready to draft and someone snipes you right before your pick. I mean, that's going to happen. You need to go into your drafts knowing that's going to happen so you don't tilt. And if you have a couple of cheap stacks, so I don't mind Jimmy G. Another one I really like is Ben Roethlisberger. If you pair him with maybe Juju, maybe James Conner, Deontay Johnson, like any of those are affordable options that you can say, you know what, I think the Steelers are going to rebound from having the most atrocious quarterback play in the league last year. So there's room, and their prices are a little bit deflated because I think everyone has that stench that they felt last year. So yeah, stacking, you can't win without stacking when it comes to best ball. It needs to happen. So, you know, if you look at your roster, for instance, that roster I have on Underdog, I have Deshaun Watson. And it came to a point where I was going to pick either Will Fuller or another wide receiver that was going around the same point. So I could have had Will Fuller. I could have gone Julian Edelman, maybe Deontay Johnson. But I chose Fuller because I looked at my lineup. I said, I hope Fuller stays alive. I hope he's not going to get hurt. But he's one of those players that could take me over the top. And you know this. I'm sure you're going to comment here. Will Fuller is not injury prone, is he?
No. And I feel like that's a term that gets thrown out a lot in fantasy space. And whenever I'm on podcasts, people ask me, is that a real thing? Not really. I mean, there are certainly injuries that are more likely to recur, and there are certain injury presentations that have a higher risk, but a player inherently of themselves is not injury prone, so to speak. And Will Fuller is a guy that last year I could not have been further away from. Like, I was like, do not even touch this dude in fantasy, not even in best ball, not even in dynasty, redraft. You don't want him. And we saw it. He came off the ACL. He was having a history of hamstring issues before. And those two factors combined is really recipe for disaster for a player that plays with speed because of how the hamstring gets stressed. So last year I was like, you know what, I'm out. And the price was kind of creeping up with the hype. But this year, I feel like people have just been burned one too many times with this guy, that his price, he's going as a wide receiver 3, almost a wide receiver 4 in ADP. At that price to potentially just smash with Deshaun Watson, I'm in on Will Fuller at that price in best ball because, like you're saying, if you're taking Will Fuller, presumably you're trying to stack him with Deshaun Watson. And if that stack hits, I mean, you are going to be in a very, very good position throughout the season. Yeah,
if you remember the one week that Will Fuller went off was against my Falcons, where he just destroyed them. Everybody was playing him in DFS. He was, the air yards. I mean, we were waiting for something big to happen, and he erupted. And I think you're going to get to see, maybe not that type of game, and that's a historic game, but you're going to get to see those performances because I think the Texans, they were kind of lucky record-wise, and I think they're going to have to lean on Watson to run a lot more. to have more pass attempts. Yes, DeAndre Hopkins is gone, but I want a piece of that Texans team, and so I'm more than willing to stack them. Let's get into a segment that I'm not even going to try to do the voice, but
come on,
let's get into the mail.
Come on.
Let's get in the mailbag.
Mailbag.
Mike gets to do a lot of the drops for us at the Footballers, and I need to insert his voice, and so maybe I'll get Mike to just give this kind of triumphant call.
There you go.
Andy's tried to do it on the podcast. Have you ever heard? And it's kind of like this dry, like yell. I don't want to recreate that at all.
No,
but
I don't think our listeners want that.
On our show, we want to make sure that you guys feel like you're a part of it. And that's one of the best parts about the Fantasy Footballers. I know for me, one of the first years listening, 2015, whenever it was, getting on a show just in a mailbag segment made me feel a part of the show, made me feel ownership of what was going on. And so even for this DFS show, yes, we get to have our heads in this. Yes, we get to write the articles in the DFS pass, but we want you guys to feel like you're a part of this. And so each week, if you guys want to send them in, you can either send them in to Matt at the Fantasy PT or myself at Kyle_Borg or the main account. We're going to be hitting DFS questions all throughout the year. But this first one's from Casey Clark, and this is a softball for you. What's the best app to use for best ball?
Yeah, for me, we talked about it already. It's Underdog Fantasy, and it's really not that close, in my opinion. I think the versatility that platform provides in terms of different size leagues and different speeds at which you can draft just really gives you anything you're looking for in best ball. So for me, that's where I play and absolutely love it. So can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I want to simplify it for people. It's just really clean. It's really simple. And this isn't an ad. This is literally what both of us use. Like, we use this app. I just used it on air. And it's really easy, really simple. And you can put in whatever amount you want. So if you're someone out there like, I'm not going to put down thousands of dollars, put in $20, put in $10, and you can get started and, get in a draft really, really quickly. So we actually had a lot of people asking the main account, at the FF Ballers, saying, what do we use for best ball? What happened to draft? Well, draft kind of eventually became Underdog. And so, we can't recommend it enough. Here's the next question. At Themi Mike says, what are some huge mistakes people make when valuing a late round player for best ball?
Yeah, I think for me, and we kind of talked about it too with like where you should be taking which positions. So we talked about quarterback, we talked about tight end, we talked about running backs being where we want to go early. And I think for me, the biggest mistake is people trying to hit on those late round running backs and taking like 2 or 3 of them in the last 5 rounds of your draft. I mean, the hit rates are just so low. And honestly, it's basically a waste of a pick. If you're taking a running back in like the 15th round that you're hoping actually produces for your roster in best ball, historically, it just doesn't happen. And so for me, I think a huge mistake people make is not using those picks on either your third tight end, your third quarterback, if you go that route, or some depth wide receivers for your roster.
Yeah, and I'll just say a stupid mistake that I've done before is just one of my last picks. I like a guy, and I'm not checking out those bye weeks. I mean, that's just, if you're getting your third tight end and you're getting the same bye week as another guy, you're not being smart. And so at the end, especially if you've done 16, 17 rounds, you're like, let's just finish this. Who are these guys at the end of the draft? It is crucial that you make sure that your bye weeks are lined up in a way where you have an optimal roster. So that's what happens a lot for me. And then I think sometimes there's names at the end that when you look at your roster, then you're like, this guy gave me zeros the entire year. I mean, this guy clearly did not help me. And so I think at the end of the draft, I try to ask myself, like, who's going to be helpful the whole year, or maybe who's going to be helpful even towards the end of the year. And so I might take a couple of guys that are in committees at the very end because they could gain a bigger role towards the end of the year. It's interesting. 2 of the players that won people best ball leagues at the running back position last year were Kenyon Drake. At the end of the year, he just went bananas. And then it was Adrian Peterson, weirdly enough. He didn't do anything all year. You probably didn't draft him. I didn't. And at the end of the year, he was super helpful. And so just realizing that you want late round value, but you want someone that can also help you towards the end of the year. Let's go to this one. It's at Kirksey Sports. He says, do you see zero RB as a viable strategy in best ball?
I think it depends on the format and the type of best ball that you're doing. So we've already talked a lot about like what the best ball mania draft on Underdog looks like. I mean, that is a massive tournament. You said it yourself. You're looking to be like the top 0.0005 or whatever the number was you used. The bottom line is it's going to take a lottery ticket to hit that and win it. So in that type of format, I think zero running back can be a way to differentiate yourself in a huge tournament. But like we said, if you're talking about, a league of 11 other people and yourself, or 9 other people and yourself, if it's a 10-team league, for me, I don't think it's very viable, and I think it's pretty risky. The win rates for teams that try that strategy typically are not great when you're talking about winning the league. And like we talked about in best ball, that's what it's all about. You have to win the league. So yeah, it's not super viable. I don't tend to do it personally. I'm not a huge fan of it in my drafts.
Yeah, the only way I could see myself, going the first 5 or 6 rounds, and depending on who you talk to, some people are purists and say, you can't take a running back until the 7th round. If you get one of those tight ends early, if you get Kelsey or Kittle, and you start off with a wide receiver. So let's just say you're at the end of the first round and you take Julio Jones and then you get Travis Kelsey. So that's your start. If you go all the way to the 3rd round, the 3-4 turn, and you're looking at those running backs and you're not crazy about it, and you see that there's some wide receiver value, I could see yourself for the first 4 rounds just saying, you know what, I got my tight end, so I'm going to punt my other tight end till the very last round. And then I've got these crazy wide receivers. I got 3 awesome wide receivers. I could see your team going there. I could even see a team that had Kelsey and then Mahomes dropped all the way to the 3rd or 4th round for some reason, that if you wanted to stack that's doable. But I think we mentioned earlier, those running backs are really what gets you the point. So if you wanted to try it out, do it. I personally want to have a more balanced team with my running backs and my wide receivers. Michael Dorsey on Twitter, he says, are higher floors more important than higher ceilings?
I think we talked about that a little bit already. I would say, for me, I think a ceiling is more important late in the draft. I think that's kind of where I would say, like, I want those last couple picks to be like, all right, I am shooting for massive upside. I'm shooting for a player that could significantly outperform their ADP, like Curtis Samuel, for example. Those are the kind of players that I want ceiling for. The floor plays I like to kind of mix in as well, but like I said earlier, I lean more towards ceiling with a few floor plays. But when you're looking at those like first, 3 rounds, maybe 4 rounds, those players all have a pretty good floor and a very big ceiling. So that really comes down to the end of the draft for me when you're looking at floor versus ceiling.
Let me put you on the spot. I'm going to name a couple of receivers, and I think some of them present higher floors and some of them present higher ceilings. So for instance, Christian Kirk to me is in an offense that, is going to have the pass attempts. It's clear he's not the one there, but I think he could be solid. I think he has a fine floor. Where maybe somebody like Darius Slayton, it's like, he was awesome last year. He could easily be the 3rd on his team this year. So those guys are going right next to each other. Kirk's at wide receiver 39. Slayton's at wide receiver 41. I feel like Slayton has a higher ceiling. Who would you prefer between those two guys?
Yeah, of those two, I'm going to take Darius Slayton because in that kind of part of my draft, I presumably already have 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 really solid wide receivers. So I feel like on most weeks I'll have those guys that I'm going to be that are going to be started in my lineup because they're scoring more points. But we saw with Daniel Jones, the relationship that those two had was awesome. And, obviously he has the chance to be the one. And with DeAndre Hopkins in town, I don't think there's any scenario where Christian Kirk has a chance to be the one.
All right, and I'll give you a running back one because this is where I struggle, honestly, in best ball drafts, because you get to this ambiguous wasteland once you get to running back 40. You're talking Matt Breida, Phillip Lindsay, Latavius Murray, Alexander Madison, Zach Moss, Boston Scott. I mean, that's a group where it's like I can squint and I can kind of see a future where these guys are relevant. I could also see a future where Phillip Lindsay just kind of he never really ends up being helpful for your team. So when you get to that region, especially running backs, do you prefer to go, hey, there's a rookie running back, I don't know what's there, and so he could be, incredible like Zach Moss. He could, take the goal line work away from Devin Singletary. Or do you take somebody that you know what they are? I know what Latavius Murray is, and if something were to happen to Alvin Kamara, he would be great.
Yeah, I think that's the type of player I want to target as like a backup running back, so to speak. I'm saying it in air quotes because they're not your starters or your backup. It's whoever scores the most points in a given week is automatically inserted into the lineup. But I think you're looking at those types of players that are more of backups to the starter already on their team. But like you said, I want a guy who I know if something happens to the guy in front of him, he is easily going to be a differentiator in my lineup and amongst my league mates, like Latavius Murray, maybe like a Tony Pollard if something would happen to Zeke, Alexander Madison if something would happen to Dalvin Cook. We've kind of seen those guys have some success, and so that's the type of player I want versus staying away from a rookie, especially in 2020 with kind of the COVID situation and the limited offseason. For me, I'm going to lean that way instead.
All right, let's get out of here on this last one from Patrick Paletto. Who's a dart throw you're willing to gamble on? And I'll go first here because I've got two guys that, they're way late. I'm talking like past wide receiver 70. So you're going way deep here. But for me, James Washington is the Steelers wide receiver that no one's talking about. He led the team in receiving yards last year. He was 11th in yards per reception last year. He's an air yards guy, and I think he's forgotten because those quarterbacks were so bad. They were just Devlin Hodges, Mason Rudolph were just terrible last year. But James Washington does something that Juju and Deontay can't, and that's just go deep, just to go for it. And so if he is that receiver, Chase Claypool could easily, replace him. I'm not imagining that this team spent second round draft capital on that guy and they're not going to use him at all. But James Washington was also a second round draft pick by this team, and he has some chemistry. He's played with Ben Roethlisberger, and he's just someone that I know, like, okay, if I'm taking a shot in the dark, if I have Ben Roethlisberger, if I have my last pick at wide receiver, why not James Washington? He could be someone that goes for, 60, 1,000, and 8 touchdowns. And for a best ball team, I would take that all day. And then another one, this is going to be gross. Wide receiver 79, John Ross, fastest man alive. This is a bet on the Bengals offense, them running 3 and 4 wide every single game because they're going to be down a ton. And if John Ross stays on the field, I know that's a lot to ask, but if John Ross stays on the field, along with AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, if he's on the field consistently, he's shown that he can have that big playability. Do you remember week 1 last year against the Seahawks? He went off. He was a top 5 wide receiver for the first month of the year before getting injured. So he has that upside. And I'm looking at this list down here. It's like Tyrell Williams, Mohamed Sanu, Kenny Stills. These are guys that are not going to have that type of ceiling, but John Ross, I've seen it, and he's in an offense kind of like the Panthers. It's like, I don't really know what they're going to be, and those are the ones that you can get for super cheap, and maybe they'll hit. So do you have a dart throw you like?
Yeah, I've got a couple that kind of come to mind right off the top. And for me, this is, again, not really exciting. It's kind of a gross pick. Russell Gage is kind of a sneaky, like, best ball in case something would ever happen to either Calvin Ridley or Julio Jones, heaven forbid. But listen, this offense has ranked top 5 in pass attempts for 2 straight years. They somehow skipped on CeeDee Lamb in the NFL draft, and they said, you know what, Russell Gage, you're our 3. Gosh. So here we go. You're shaking your head. You're a Falcons fan.
That killed me. Killed me.
Yeah, I was shocked. But listen, like, if something would happen, I have zero doubts that Russell Gage would be an every down player for that team, catching passes from Matt Ryan. And when you talk about kind of, we talked about correlation and what you want to see in terms of how you succeed. For me, Russell Gage is a player that I'm taking if I don't have Todd Gurley on my roster, because if Todd Gurley with the knee and the workload concerns can't sustain the running game, the backups there are very questionable. Matt Ryan could legitimately lead the league in pass attempts and passing yards this season. And if that happens, Russell Gage is going to be producing some weeks, sometimes more than you think, and he's going as the wide receiver 81 in basketball. So I'll take a dart throw there.
Yeah, Gage, we talked about this on the show the other day. He led the team, the wide receivers at least, in red zone targets. So not Julio Jones, Russell Gage, an undrafted free agent. So yeah, go figure that. And you got one more?
Yeah, I think the second, again, I feel like these all become wide receivers because this is kind of the target that you're talking about, like a dart throw, and they're super late in your draft. I think another wide receiver that I'm taking a shot on is N'Keal Harry. He's going as the wide receiver 62. Listen, we know the story, right? It wasn't great last year. He hardly produced, but it's a new offense. Cam Newton's in town. The opportunity is massive. Julian Edelman is just 1 year older. Outside of Sanu and Edelman, I mean, I'm not really sure what this wide receiver is going to look like, and I think he has the most upside in that pass-catching group, in my opinion, and Cam Newton that is there to elevate that passing game, I think more than what Tom Brady was, where it was kind of more conservative in nature. I'll take a shot on the former first-round pick and just see if he kind of comes out and smashes in year 2. So the price is very cheap. I think he's worth, I should say, taking a gamble on here in best ball.
I'm going to figure out a way to disagree with you, but I actually, so far, I love that pick. I have him in Dynasty. I'm hoping for a bounce back. But yeah, when you get to wide receiver 62, when you get to that land, he could easily lead the team in targets. I mean, it's probably going to be Julian Edelman, but he could easily lead the team this year. Cam Newton loves those kind of big targets. So yeah, I love that pick. And at the end of your draft, that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping for a guy, you're telling yourself a story, a narrative, maybe this could be it. So yeah, just in closing, which one we want to say, this DFS podcast, really, we want to integrate it with the Foot Clan, with people that listen to the show. We want you to feel like you're a part of what we're doing, that you're enjoying the content, that you're part of what we get to write on the internet on the DFS Pass. And so, yeah, this is a show that, we're getting to start off 2 new hosts together. We're going to integrate guests from around the fantasy community. And so, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to do this together, man, each week to kind of dissect, different angles of each game. We're going to talk about stacks. We're going to talk about, how do you approach this week in terms of, your salary? How do you approach, which teams you should avoid? I mean, there's so much great things that we're going to get to talk about in terms of DFS world. And this is just the beginning. So any last words you want to share?
I've seen the guest list that you've shared it with me. It is amazing. So yes, listeners, subscribe to the podcast. You're going to want to listen and listen to these guests on here. That's phenomenal. Super excited for this season. We have football. I'll close it out with a third fist pump because I'm so excited for football this year, and really happy to have everyone listening with us along the way. So yes, very excited.
Yes, and Matthew's gonna be a different man next time we talk to him. He's gonna be a married man. So
I will.
Hope you guys have a great week, and thank you for listening to the Footballers DFS podcast.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com.